Hey everybody, a little bit of a different video today. So before we start next chapter, which is World War II, we're going to do a little bit of an intro section, kind of identifying leaders of various European countries and defining some key terms that we're going to need to know going into World War II. So there is no section quiz that goes with this. This is just going to be you listen, you take notes, we watch a video, and you start working on your review guide because there's a little bit about these people on your review guide. So our learning objectives for this are to identify leaders of various European countries and to define terms like fascism, Nazism, and totalitarianism. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So we kind of have to start with some context because where we kind of have been leaving off is like the 1920s. Well, we got to bridge the gap between the 20s and the 30s into World War II. So after World War One, it was a period of boom. There was benefits from wartime economies. Women also saw a massive expansion in their rights. There were more opportunities to vote. They were working. They were socializing. They were staying single. They were showing off their ankles, which is quite scandalous for the 20s. It's also known as the Jazz Age. It's a fast-paced music that represented life. It's also the era of prohibition or the banning of alcohol in the United States, and the rise of organized crime with figures like Al Capone. In terms of literature, the Harlem Renaissance. In terms of science, radioactivity is discovered by Marie Curie. Einstein publishes the theory of relativity. Penicillin is discovered, and Sigmund Freud becomes a leading figure in psychology. But democracies are going to struggle. In Britain, political parties are going to be running amok. And by 1922, Ireland is wanting to become more self-governing against Britain. France is also racked with political parties and those reparation questions that were left unanswered at the end of World War One. In the US, we're in a bit of a red scare at the moment. There's a fear of radicals and communist uprisings because of the Russian Revolution. We also placed immigration limits specifically on people from Asia and those that are from Eastern and Southern Europe, so the Slavs. Like we put in like legitimate legislation that set a quota as to how many could come in the country every year. And when we hit the quota, sorry, you got to go back. There's no room for you. But the boom of the 20s isn't going to last. Economic woes are going to result in falling demand and overproduction, and attempts to regulate the market just don't work. Hence the Great Depression. It's important to understand after World War One, the United States gave loans to European nations to help them rebuild. Now they're not able to. Germany also suffered because they couldn't pay their reparations. And then Britain and France couldn't pay back the loans to the United States because they're not getting those reparations from Germany. It's kind of a cyclical cycle of debt in which everybody suffers. Well, this leads to more militaristic leaders taking control in key countries. So we're going to start with Italy and fascism. This is a centralized authoritarian government that is non-communist. Fascism and communism, two very separate things. They do not mix. But there are similar elements. Under fascism, it's typically meant to glorify the state over the individual. It's destructive to basic human rights. Blind loyalty or nationalism is key. It also focuses on aggressive foreign expansion and provides a strong, stable government. The people of Italy were mad because they didn't get all that was promised. Again, remember, they weren't invited to the peace conference and weren't given any of the land that they were promised. Add that economic crisis, well, Benito Mussolini, whose name rhymes with tortellini, utilized his power and confidence to take control of Italy. Now, we've kind of talked about Stalin a little bit, like briefly. Um, he established the totalitarian state of powerful and complex bureaucracy in the Soviet Union. It's important to understand Stalin is extremely paranoid. So we have the Great Purge. The gulags, or system of brutal labor camps, are going to be established. He's going to eliminate any and all political opponents, including military officials. About half of the high command of the Soviet military will be purged because Stalin thinks they're out to get him. Like, he's that paranoid when his son is captured during World War II. Instead of doing a prisoner exchange with Germany to get his son back, Stalin sends a Soviet sniper to take out his son. because he was afraid his son would come back as a German spy. That's paranoid. He's also going to heavily rely on propaganda and censorship. And as a reminder, under communism, well, at least this version of communism, they heavily embrace atheism. So there is no God, it's just communist ideology. We also talk about their foreign policy, Comintern or Communist International, which encouraged worldwide revolution. We'll talk more about that next chapter, actually. Well, let's move on to probably the one person you all are already familiar with, Adolf Hitler. He was a democratically elected chancellor of Germany. While he was in prison, he will write his book Mein Kampf, outlining his obsessions, the ideas of extreme nationalism, racism, and anti Semitism. In there, he identifies an idea known as Lebensraum, or a living space for Aryans. He also calls for the appointment of Führer, or a strong leader. And with the Great Depression, he promised the people to end the reparations, to create jobs, and defy the Treaty of Versailles. Basically, he said every single thing the people want to hear. Hence why him and his party were democratically elected. It's also important to understand Hitler's going to purge his own party and work to establish a Third Reich or a master race. He also heavily utilized the Gestapo or secret police, and even goes so far as to pass Nuremberg laws that deprived Jewish people of Germany of citizenship and provide severe restrictions like they weren't allowed to own bicycles or own businesses. During the early days of the Nazi regime, we have Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, where you see attacks on Jewish communities all across the country. You also have the Nazi Youth being established, basically a Nazi indoctrination system masquerading as a German version of the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, essentially. He also establishes a state church that's anti Christian. Try and keep these ideas in mind as we're going throughout into the rest of this chapter. Right, that is it for notes for today. I'll see you all next time. Bye, guys.